All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you all and happy end of September. My name is Cole Libera. I am a lobbyist at Dorn Policy Group, but I have the distinct honor of sitting as a co-chair on WESTMARC's Public Affairs Committee and also on their board of directors. And today we have an interesting conversation to bless you guys with. We've got David Lujan, the director from the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, with us to talk about Prop 208, which is the Invest in Ed proposition. Before we get started, quickly, I want to say that this is not a debate forum. This is simply an education forum. There is no back and forth, and we will hear from both sides. The point of WESTMARC is to bring together business, education, and government, and to hear all sides. So we know this is a sensitive issue to our members, and we want to get the bare bones back. So David, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away, please go ahead.
Thank you, Cole. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity. I had the opportunity actually last spring before everything changed to attend WESTMARC's luncheon at the Raceway and really enjoyed that and just really appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. As was said, I'm David Lujan. I'm the director for the Arizona Center for Economic Progress. And our organization is one of 5 organizations behind Proposition 208. The others are Children's Action Alliance, the Arizona Interfaith Network, Stand for Children, and the Arizona Education Association. And the 5 organizations have been working together for, I think, probably the last 3 or 4 years, working to put together a proposal on the table that will help to address the funding crisis in Arizona's public schools. And you may recall we were behind the effort in 2018 to try and put a similar measure on the ballot, which was struck down by the courts. And when it was struck down by the courts, our coalition stuck together and said that we were going to continue to work together and wait to see whether the legislature was going to address the funding crisis in our schools. And if they were not, and if they did not, that we were prepared to go back and put another proposal on the ballot in 2020. And unfortunately, our legislature did not come up with a plan to address the funding crisis in our schools. And so here we are this year with Proposition 208. And we're doing this because between 2008 and 2015, no state in the country cut more from its public education system than Arizona. More than $2 billion in funding was cut from our public education system during that time. And our public schools are operating today with less funding than they had a decade ago. We are 48th in the country in per pupil funding. And we're feeling the ramifications of that in the form of one of the worst teacher shortage crises in the country. And new data was just released last week showing that teacher shortage crisis is getting worse. And we have also some of the largest class sizes in the country. And so Proposition 208 will address that by raising an estimated $940 million in new revenue each year. This is revenue that will be voter protected, that has strict accountability, that the politicians at the state capitol cannot touch. And it can only be used for very specific purposes. And those purposes include increasing teacher salaries and increasing the wages of other support staff and staff that work with students. It cannot be used for any administrative costs. So it can be used to increase the salaries of teachers, school counselors, school nurses, classroom aides, bus drivers, library attendants, custodial workers, all of the people that's jobs are so instrumental in helping to educate the students. But again, it cannot be used for any sort of administrative costs. The other part that I'm really excited about is that 12% of the overall revenue, about more than $100 million a year, will go to career and technical education. This will actually more than double the state funding for career and technical education, which I think is huge. And I think if you ask anybody who works with career and technical education, these are the programs that train our high school students to fill jobs in our workforce that are in most demand. These are the programs that give high school students the skills while they're in high school to be able to enter the workforce if they decide not to go to college, or if they do decide to go to college, they'll be that much further ahead. And then the last portion of the funding will go to teacher mentoring programs. One of the things that we have found from the teacher shortage crisis is that we are losing a lot of teachers after their first or second year of teaching. And when they're asked, they say it's because they often didn't have the mentoring support, the classroom support to be prepared for those first or second years. And a lot of school districts used to provide a lot more mentoring support for first or second year teachers. But because of all the cuts that we've seen over the last 2 decades, a lot of schools have had to cut back on the mentoring services. So this will also provide some funding for mentoring programs as well. So we're really excited about the opportunities. This will provide the greatest investments in our public schools in Arizona in more than 2 decades. I'll throw a couple of 99% figures at you. 99.9% of the new revenue from Proposition 208 will go into the classroom. 99.9% of the new revenue will be spent in the classroom. It cannot be used for any administrative costs. The other 99% is 99% of Arizona taxpayers will not pay 1 penny more with Invest in Ed. This will only affect the top 1% of the wealthiest taxpayers in Arizona. And essentially it is a 3.5% surcharge on the wealthiest 1%. So that would be, if you're an individual tax filer, that would be people who have taxable income of $250,000 or more a year. Or if you're a married filer, it would be married couples who have taxable income of more than $500,000 a year. And the 3.5% surcharge is only applied to the taxable income earned in excess of those amounts. So if you are in that top 1%, the income you earn below 500,000 or below 250,000 is not touched by the 3.5% surcharge. So an example, a married couple that makes $501,000 in taxable income a year, they are only taxed on that $1,000 above. So 3.5% of $1,000 is $35. So a married couple that makes $501,000 in taxable income will pay $35 more per year if Proposition 208 passes. And the best thing is it will raise an estimated $940 million a year for our public schools. So let me just address a couple of fact-checking items. I know you're going to hear from the opponents after this. So let me just address a couple of things, and I'm going to open it up to questions as well. But anticipating what I think our opposition will say. And let me first of all address the small business argument. And I think many of you are owners of businesses or have S corporations or other types of pass-through businesses where the income from those businesses passes through to you on your individual income tax returns. And so you know that S corporations, LLCs, partnerships, sole proprietorships, the business entity themselves are not taxed in Arizona. That income is passed through to the individuals to pay on their individual income tax. So no business entity in Arizona will pay more taxes with Invest in Ed. The only ones who will be, again, it's just individuals whose taxable income, the income they claim from those businesses on their tax returns as individual income, puts them in the top 1%. And according to the Small Business Administration, the average income, taxable income for small business owners in Arizona is $48,000 a year. So that's well below the thresholds of Invest in Ed. You're going to hear from our opponents that they'll throw out a figure of 50% of the businesses in Arizona are going to be taxed by this, and that is absolutely false. According to the IRS data, this will only impact of individuals who claim business income on their tax filings. It impacts 3 to 4% of the total small business or total business owners who file taxes. 3 to 4% of all taxpayers in Arizona who claim business income. So this is not a tax on business. It's not a tax on small businesses. This is a tax on the top 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. The other claim you'll hear from our opposition is that this is going to double state income taxes, and that is absolutely false. It is mathematically impossible for anybody to have their taxes doubled by Invest in Ed. An example, a married couple in Arizona that has $650,000 in taxable income, $650,000 in taxable income, that married couple will still pay less taxes in Arizona with Invest in Ed than they will in 34 other states. They will pay less income taxes in Arizona with Invest in Ed than they will in 34 other states. So that is not putting us among the top income taxes in the country. We will have, with Invest in Ed, the effective tax rate will still be below the national average and will still be below the tax rate of the majority of other states. And I can go into during the question and answer how that is, because I think a lot of confusion comes about the top tax rate and how that relates to what you pay. The top tax rate is not determinative of whether you are going to pay more or not. And I can go into that during the Q&A. The one thing I want to talk about is the impact on our economy. We have heard from business leaders, and I think probably many of you have experienced this. And when we've talked to business leaders, and actually when some of the top business leaders in Arizona have been surveyed in recent years, what is the biggest concern that you have for doing business in Arizona? What's the most important thing that we could do in Arizona to improve our business climate, to improve our workforce? And consistently, when business leaders are surveyed, the response has consistently been improving and investing in our public education system and improving the quality of our workforce. And that's what Proposition 208 does. Proposition 208 provides our public schools with the resources they need to provide all students in Arizona with a quality education. I want to just talk a minute about the impact on rural communities in particular. In many rural small towns across Arizona, the public schools are among the largest employers in those small towns. But many of those school districts have had to cut back over the last 2 decades because of all the spending cuts and all the funding cuts to public schools. They've had to cut wages, they've had to eliminate positions. So think about the impact in small communities across Arizona if some of the largest employers, our public schools, suddenly have millions of new dollars that they can rehire and refill some of those jobs and give wage increases to their employees that they've not been able to do for years. That means we're going to have people in small towns across Arizona with more money in their pockets to go out and buy things in stores, to eat out in restaurants, and to support the local economies all across Arizona. That's good for small business. That's good for our economy. The other, and I already mentioned it, is the more than doubling of state investments in career and technical education. That's huge for our future workforce. I know an organization like the Arizona Technology Council, that was their #1 legislative priority just a couple of years ago, was to get an additional $14 million of investment for career and technical education. This is going to provide $100 million more in investments in career and technical education. So that's huge as well. Finally, before I open it up to questions, I just want to point out why this is so important for Arizona and why this is the right solution. We, as I mentioned, have been cutting funding in Arizona for more than 20 years. And for more than 20 years, Arizona has been in the bottom 10 in funding for public education. We continue to be 48th today in per pupil funding. And what that has meant for school districts all across Arizona, what it's meant for the superintendents of those school districts, what it's meant for the principals of those districts, is they have had to make decisions every day about whether they use the dollars, the limited dollars that they have, to repair the brakes on the school bus, to fix the leaky roof, to retain the classroom aides that are so important for the teachers to be able to educate students, to be able to retain the school counselors and the school nurses, which are so important to student health and student learning, or to be able to give teachers the raises that they need to maintain a competitive wage. Those are the decisions that superintendents have been having to make for over 20 years in our schools. But more importantly, what's the impact of that been on our students? Think about students that are in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, who have been going into our public education system in that kind of underfunded environment, particularly like in those early years where all of the research shows that if students are not learning to read and by the end of the third grade, they are going to likely struggle to keep up throughout the rest of their academic years and throughout their adult life. And we now have in Arizona students who entered our education system 20 years ago and went through all 12 grades in one of the most underfunded education systems. They went into those first 3 grades and all of the rest of their grades, oftentimes with overcrowded classrooms, sometimes with teachers teaching the whole year who are just substitute teachers without the qualifications. Think about what that does to our future workforce. Think about what that has already done to our economy. And that is what Invest in Ed is designed to do. I know there have been critics of this plan, but the fact is, this is the plan that is on the books, and our opponents would attack whatever plan is out there. The same opposition that is attacking Proposition 208 are the same people who opposed the minimum wage in 2016. And you could take the arguments that they made with the minimum wage a few years ago and just replace it with this new proposition, and they're exactly the same. And the sky is falling fear that they put out there with the minimum wage, those things did not come true either. They said that businesses were going to leave. They said that this was going to hurt our economy. And now today they're saying that we can't pass Prop 208 because our economy is so strong. So we put Prop 208 together because the business community, the people who said they were going to come out with a plan, who was going to work with the legislature, did not do that. And so this is the plan we have. We think it's a good solution because in a time of economic crisis, particularly, the last thing we wanted to do was to ask struggling families and small businesses to pay more. And this, under this plan, they will not pay 1 penny more. This only, again, taxes the top 1%, and 99% of the new revenue raised will go into our classrooms. So thank you again for the opportunity. I can talk some more, but I want to leave some time for questions. Our website is investined.com. You can go there to get more information, and you can also go on there to make a donation to our efforts as well to help our campaign. So investined.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. We appreciate all of that fantastic information. And like David said, we've got some time for audience questions if there are any. I don't see any coming in, but there's a chat box where you can go ahead and enter a message that you have for David. But David, is there, I don't see a message in the box. KJ, if you see a message in the chat box, please go ahead. Here we go in the questions. Okay, so we've got one. What % of the current state budget is spent on education?
I don't have the exact percentage. It is somewhere between 45 and 50%, which is pretty consistent with most states around the country. Most states, the funding for public education typically is one of the biggest expenditures. But again, that does not equate to spending a lot. As I mentioned, Arizona is 48th in the country in funding. And I'll also tell you that, we talk about economics. The majority of economic research, whether it's Arizona researchers or national researchers, will say one of the strongest things you can do for your economy is to invest in your public education system. And a number of our neighboring states have been investing more in the education system in recent years, and a number of other states around the country have. And as a result, Arizona is actually falling further and further behind the national average in funding public education. And so, so Arizona needs to do much more, and that's what Proposition 208 will do.
Great, thanks, David. I don't see any other questions right now.
I
Uh,
can continue talking if you'd like. I have a couple other points I'm happy to make. I just wanted to make sure that I was answering questions if people had it.
yeah, please. And if a question pops in, I will gently interrupt you and let you know. Oh, wait, here we go. We got another one. Where do our U.S. senators and our governor stand on this issue?
Our U.S. senators have not weighed in on this as far as I know. Governor Ducey is opposed to this, which is really unfortunate for a number of reasons. And I'll just point out one. He held a press conference just a couple of weeks ago on the issue of teen suicide. He was talking about how for children in Arizona between the ages of 10 and 14, the leading cause of death in Arizona is suicide, which is a horrible, horrible thing. And he was talking in that press conference that one of the things we need to do to address that is for our schools to play a bigger role in making sure that we're looking out for kids and making sure that we have counselors in our schools and that we have nurses and the teachers are paying attention. Well, when you think about it, if we have some of the most overcrowded classrooms, if we have a teacher shortage crisis that's getting worse with more than 1,700 classrooms without a qualified certified teacher this year, we also have the largest student to counselor ratio, one counselor for every 900 students. Proposition 208 addresses every single one of those issues. It gives us the funding to hire more school counselors. It gives us the funding to hire more school nurses and to increase the wages of those positions. This will make our schools safer. It'll make our schools healthier because it gives the schools the resources to be able to hire the personnel to address that. So Governor Ducey has said he's opposed. It's unfortunate because I think this will address a lot of the things that he wants to accomplish. And so there's that.
Okay, and we've got another one. David, how do we hold the education system accountable for improvements made through this proposed funding increase for schools?
Yeah, good question, and thank you. This gets kind of to fact checking our opposition as well, because you may have seen some of the commercials that have said that 50 cents of every class dollar goes in, to administrative spending. Let me just make it very clear, and this is both from the U.S. Census Bureau and the Arizona Auditor General, who did a report just last year. Arizona is at the bottom of the country in its spending for administrative costs. Arizona spends the fourth lowest of all the states in administrative costs in our public schools. The money in Invest in Ed from Prop 208, 99.9% goes into the classrooms. This is how you can make sure, because the legislature cannot touch it. That's been the biggest problem over the years, is that the legislature has been taking the money that has been meant for the schools. You're going to hear that the legislature has been putting money into the schools in the last few years. That's actually not true. We've actually continued to cut every year. There is money, for example, that schools use for curriculum and technology, that there's a formula that they're supposed to get of about $370 million a year. The legislature has been restoring that a little bit, and the legislature likes to say that's new funding because they're restoring 25%. That's not new funding. If you're only restoring 25%, that means you're cutting 75% of the funding that the school districts were promised. And so this is accountable because the legislature cannot touch it, and it gets distributed directly to the schools on a formula basis, and it can only be used for very specific purposes. It cannot be used for administrative costs, and school districts are audited regularly. Not to mention the local accountability with school boards and all the eyes that are on school district budgets. So you can be assured that school districts spend the money wisely. We've had many reports that show that Arizona schools spend money more efficiently than they do in other states, and so we're not concerned about that issue.
Great, thanks, David. Why haven't policymakers, legislators, or the governor made a proposal to help catch up on Arizona's investment in schools, or have they?
So all we have seen in recent years is just putting whatever extra money might be available during good years, putting some of that into our public education system. But they have not come up with a plan. Why? I don't know. And this is why we say Proposition 208 is so important, is because frankly, our opposition would be opposed to any sort of revenue raising. All they want to do is just maintain the status quo. It's more evident than that is all you have to do is look at 2 years ago. We had $1 billion revenue surplus. That funding formula that I told you about that's been underfunded for the past decade that school districts use for technology and supplies and curriculum, rather than deciding to fully fund that formula, the legislature passed a $483 million tax cut. And so that is an example of I think the unwillingness to come up with any sort of plan. The legislature hasn't. And so Proposition 208 is basically taking matters into our own hands and saying it's time to give voters the opportunity to vote on this. Let me just also quickly, because I forgot to address this. People ask often, why are we just taxing the top 1%? So I mentioned at the beginning that between 2008 and 2015, no state in the country cut more from its public education system than Arizona. And in the middle of making all of those cuts in 2011 and 2012, our state legislature, the same year they were making the biggest cuts to education funding, they passed the largest capital gains tax cut in state history, which 99% of benefited the top 1% of the wealthiest. And that's just one example. They have made a lot of cuts over the years that have just benefited the wealthy and have not gone to everyday Arizonans. And that has made our tax code very unbalanced and has meant that the other 99% of Arizonans have had to shoulder more of the load for funding our schools and roads and everything else. And so Proposition 208 really is designed to try and balance out our tax code, make it fair, and again, address the funding crisis in our schools, which will be so important to strengthening our economy and building the Arizona that we want.
Great, thanks, David. And we've got about 2 minutes left here. So if you want to say anything to wrap up your position and why you think this should be passed by the voters, please go ahead and feel free to make your pitch.
All right. Well, thanks again for the opportunity. You'll probably hear from our opposition too that Arizona actually had a top tax rate of 8% throughout its history, all the way up till the 1990s. And our schools, if you can look at any report by Dennis Hoffman or Tom Rex, who are ASU economists, they will tell you that our economy was never stronger than what it was in the 1990s. On every economic indicator, Arizona's economy was strongest in the 90s in terms of income, in terms of economic growth. What happened in the 90s is we started to cut taxes and get to the level we are. And it's not the fact that we cut taxes, but the declining revenues. Contrary to what our opposition will say, Arizona's income tax has been steadily declining since the 1990s. And that has meant less funding for public education, and that has resulted in the funding crisis that we see in our schools today. And as I mentioned a couple of times, thousands and thousands of students have already gone through our school system in one of the most underfunded school systems in the country. Now, I'm not making the case that more money means more academic achievement, but almost every proposal that's out there to help students attain that academic achievement needs more resources for our public schools. So if we want our students to achieve, we want our economy, our workforce to be where it is, then we need to provide our schools with the resources that they will need to give every student a proper education. And we really feel strongly that Prop 208 is the best plan. Frankly, it's the only plan that's out there to do this. And thank you very much for the opportunity, and we appreciate the support.
David, thanks so much for your time. We truly appreciate it, and you finished right at 9:30, so perfect. Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.
You too. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So we are about to start the second portion of our educational summit here on Prop 208. And I just want to remind everyone, because I forgot at the beginning, to go ahead and enter your questions into the question box. And I will go ahead and try to get to as many of those as possible, pending the time. And now I see that we have Vice President of the Arizona Chamber, on government affairs and communications, Garrick Taylor, and I believe we have Becky Hill on from Hill Advocacy. Her screen has not popped up yet, but I see her in the chat box-ish. So Garrick, if you want to wait for Becky, we can wait a second. But we just had a great conversation with David Lujan, and now we are looking forward to hearing the facts and arguments for the other side. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself and go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Cole. Thanks for the invitation. Cole, if you want to gesticulate wildly or wave your hands when Becky's on and ready to go. But as Cole said, I'm a vice president at the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There's Becky. We're one of the entities opposing Proposition 208. It's a pretty broad coalition in opposition, however. So we'll be giving you the perspective as the chamber sees it. And Cole, Becky's here, so should we go ahead and get rolling?
Yeah, let's get started. And Becky, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself quickly, Garrick just did the same, and we're on a tight time crunch here, so we want to get rolling as soon as possible. We can't hear you. You might be muted. Let's see, KJ, do you know how to, she's self, audio.
It says she's self-muted.
On your dashboard, there's that little picture of a microphone.
Yeah, there's a little picture of a microphone right below the orange hide control panel button. You see that?
If you want to let Garrick go ahead, I'll work with Becky offline to help her with her audio.
It also might be her computer, so she may have to call in if we can't get it figured out on this end.
Okay. We'll let KJ work with Becky on that offline, and we'll let Garrick go ahead and start his presentation.
Okay, thanks, Cole. As we discussed at the outset, I'm with the Arizona Chamber of Commerce Industry. We're part of the opposition coalition on Proposition 208. I'm going to give you the perspective of our organization, and we believe the broader business community. And then Becky will reflect a little bit on what's going on in education funding, specifically K-12, and talk about why Proposition 208 is so concerning from that perspective. You know, let's level set this. If Proposition 208 passes, we'll have a new top individual income tax rate of 8%. Currently, our top individual income tax rate is 4.5%. So that jump from 4.5 to 8 is significant. In fact, it's a 77.7% increase. That would place Arizona in a much more uncompetitive position post Prop 208 than we are today. Now, keep in mind, Arizona entered the pandemic with one of the hottest economies in the nation, and that is a result of wise policy decisions, and that includes wise tax policy decisions. Now, the four corner states, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, all of our top individual income tax rates are under 5%. So Arizona is regionally competitive. We're also nationally competitive. Now, our neighbors, in addition to the ones I just mentioned, Nevada does not have a personal income tax. And California, well, that's in its own category altogether. In fact, their top rate is more than 13%. So they're in their own stratosphere. If Arizona were to pass Proposition 208, that would place us on a top 10 list that no state wants to be on. We'd be on a list of top 10 highest income tax rates. So we need to think about that in terms of what that means for our economic development prospects and our job growth going forward. I think this is of particular importance to a group like WESTMARC. How do you sell the West Valley and the region? Well, one of the ways you do that is through a competitive tax environment. And we would lose that comparative advantage that we enjoy today if we were to pass Proposition 208. Now, one of the concerns we have about the impact of this income tax rate is that it goes after small businesses. Now, we know that through the various advertisements and other communications that the proponents have put out, they will tell you that this does not affect small businesses. Or when they concede that it does affect small business or small business owners, they'll say that it's a very small amount. Well, in reality, it's more than 50% of the taxpayers who are affected by Proposition 208, were it to pass, are small businesses. And these small businesses are the backbone of Arizona's economy. We need expanding small businesses and a welcoming small business sector to ensure that we emerge from this pandemic-induced slowdown in a strong position. Now, you're probably wondering, well, then why, what's the rub here? Why small businesses? Well, remember, small businesses don't pay their taxes on the corporate income tax code. Profits are passed through to owners' individual tax returns, and you pay taxes on those profits, but you pay at the individual rate. So remember, under Prop 208, we go from our current top rate of 4.5 all the way up to 8%. What that means then is that small businesses would be paying a top rate that is much higher than what corporations pay on the corporate code, even the Fortune 500. Our top corporate rate is 4.9%. You're going to have companies like Google and Apple paying at 4.9, while you've got small businesses, an LLC or something, spending or paying at a much, much higher rate. That's just not fair. And it just puts downward pressure on economic development. It makes it harder to be a small business in Arizona. And as I said, we believe the small businesses are going to be extremely important to Arizona's economic recovery. Now, the other issue is that we don't believe that it delivers a reliable source of revenues for our schools. And assuming that Becky gets rolling on this, we can spend some time on this. But you have to remember that this segment of tax revenues, it's the most volatile. In fact, during the Great Recession, this segment of taxpayers saw a more than 30% drop in what it was contributing to the general fund. Now, that's important because if you're a school board member or you're a superintendent, you can't base future budgets, including your teacher pay contracts, on such a volatile segment of revenues. So perhaps you'll be satisfied with some sort of bonus structure if you're a supporter of Prop 208. But let's be clear, if you are looking for higher contractual pay for teachers, you're not going to get it through Proposition 208. So 77% increase on the personal income tax. It will target small businesses, and it will not deliver for schools and teachers the way proponents have said. Cole, I'm going to pause here for a second before I continue my rant. Is Becky on?
It does not look like we have Becky on right now. We do have a question, and it may be better answered by Becky, but I can go ahead and ask you that anyway. We'll start it right now. How's Prop 208 divided to be spent? For example, administrations, teacher salaries, classrooms.
Yeah. Hey, Cole, maybe what we could do is, do you want to display the graphic? Because we have, obviously, we're the opponents. We have a different take on the distribution than the proponents.
Sure.
So that's the shakeout there. Cole, I want to draw your attention to the right side of the screen. 50% for fluctuating non-guaranteed grants to teachers. Now, teachers is in quotes because the definition that the proponents use, it's a very broad definition of teacher. So as you think about that individual at the front of the classroom teacher, if you believe that it's going to directly impact the pay of that person, we would caution you that we don't believe that is the case because of that expanded definition of what a teacher is. Now, I also note, Cole, just to go over this point one more time, the fluctuation of this, remember, we're relying on a very volatile segment of tax revenues. So if you, again, are expecting to bank on these revenues being static, and school districts and charter operators being able to count on these dollars, we just don't see it. We're still subject to regular business cycles and ups and downs of the economy. So when the proponents talk about its ability to generate nearly $1 billion a year, we don't see how you get there through Proposition 208. I'll also note that, Cole, if you look at the top of the graphic, that pie slice about 3% for the Arizona Teachers Academy, let's be clear that this Proposition 208 does not benefit the education sector on the continuum. So in other words, if you're looking for a way to better fund education from early childhood to higher ed, including our community colleges and universities, you don't get that through Proposition 208 either. You see that small slice for the Teachers Academy. But Cole, I think it's important for WESTMARC members to understand is that when, and many of you already know this, but when we pass measures at the ballot box, it puts real handcuffs on the legislature due to something we call the Voter Protection Act. Now, the proponents will say that the passage of Prop 208 delivers accountability because politicians can't go in and monkey with the revenues that are generated by Prop 208. What it does is it puts real handcuffs, real restrictions on the budgeting process. So if you, as we deal with the ups and downs of the economy, we've really removed a lot of flexibility from the budgeting process if Prop 208 were to pass. So Cole, our concern is that lawmakers will be forced to go in and make cuts in other areas of government, including core areas of government. So if you're concerned about the rising cost of higher education, well, unfortunately, you'd be exposed to tuition increases here because where else is there to cut? If you're concerned about social welfare programs or healthcare programs for the working poor, you should be concerned because of the budgeting restrictions going forward in this. Law enforcement issues like DPS, another issue, corrections. All these core state responsibilities are put at risk due to the constrictions that are imposed by passage of 208. So Cole, I'll pause there and we can go on to the next question or hit another topic.
Sure. And Becky, can you hear us? Are you there?
I can hear you. Can you hear me yet?
I can hear you. Yes. Good
Yay!
to go. All right. So Becky, if you want to jump in, I know Garrick's done most of the talking here, but if you want to bring in more of your perspective and how you fit into the opposition group, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just share real quickly. Hello again, I'm Becky Hill, and I'm here today as someone who has worked in education quite a bit for the last 2 decades. Worked for a superintendent of public instruction, was the education advisor to Governor Napolitano, and have spent most of the last 2 decades advising a variety of educational institutions on how to improve outcomes for kids. So that's my background. And early on, because of my experience in education policy specifically, I should say, was asked to look at 208 and just share some general thoughts around where do I think this is going to go and what do I think the impact will be. And I think that's really the question everyone should be asking is, are we going to actually see an impact from these dollars and from this tax increase? I think the answer is we just don't know, and it's not going to be clear. I think even 5, 10, 15 years from now, one, where this money is going, and two, if it's actually resulted in some of the claims that we see from the campaign. One of the things I'd like to do is just real quickly, since we are short on time, I'm going to skip some of what I was going to say and go right to those claims that we do see. One of the things that is top of the page every time you talk to a proponent of 208 is this idea of ending the teacher shortage crisis and reducing class sizes. For context, what I'd like to say about that is once you take the administrative dollars off the top, once you cut the funding in half, which is what this does, only 50% goes towards quote unquote teacher pay, although who can receive the money is identified and defined by the local school board, not the measure itself. you're looking at roughly $350 to $400 million if the proponents' estimates turn out to be true. Because remember, there's a big administrative cut that goes to 4 or 5 agencies right off the top of that, and then you take into account volatility. So, but let's concede their estimates and say it's roughly $400 million. You have to remember that a $700 million plus teacher pay raise proposal of a 20% pay raise was opposed by the same group that's supporting this measure because it wasn't going to be enough. And yet magically half that amount of money that is not guaranteed and that does not have an inflator and that is not required to only go to teachers and certified classroom staff, it is supposed to give us this magical pay raise that will end teacher shortages and reduce class sizes. It just doesn't pan out. The other problem is that this doesn't have the local focus like Prop 301 does. The school site decision-making, the principal decision-making, the teacher decision-making is not a part of this measure. And when you look at the revenue uncertainty, to say that those dollars are going to go to base compensation, the base compensation would have to be very small to be able to keep the kind of financial promise you need to make to teachers with such a volatile amount of money that, like I said, half the amount that went to the teacher pay proposal called 20 by 2020. The other thing that I think would be of interest to this group is the 12% that is set aside for CTE. The challenge there again is that it says it can be used for CTE. It is sold as being used for CTE, but it doesn't have to be used for CTE. For example, it can be used for teacher planning time. It does not have to be used for career and technical education. And one of the biggest problems I see is that it cannot be used for any existing programs or strategies. So if we have a promising strategy around industry certification and supporting and expanding industry certifications and, well-paying, in-demand jobs, according to the language of this measure, you cannot use the money for that strategy or those programs. So we really don't know where that money will go because you cannot use it for any existing program or strategy. So in the end, if you look at the small amount of the full tax increase that could go to teacher pay but isn't guaranteed to go to teacher pay, if you look at the volatility of the dollars, and if you look at how the other 50% is spread across any number of programs and options totaling more than 24, by the way, the spread is going to be so thin, we just don't see the impact. And really the big problem for that is the public is being sold a promise. It's being sold an impact. It's being sold the end of the teacher shortage crisis, right? That's not going to happen. And so when that doesn't happen, is the public going to be willing to go back and vote yes on something that's real? What chance are we going to have to go back and invest in something that will do the things that are promised on that website? The very last item that is on the website that the campaign promises this funding will do is restore cuts. That's funny language because there are no more cuts to restore. The soft capital funding has been restored. There's a 20% teacher pay raise. The SFB dollars, which for a while during the recession did not build schools ahead of student demand, you had to wait until schools were overflowing to get your money. That's behind us now as well. You can build ahead of student demand. And so if you look at what we were funding per kid before the recession, it was in the high, just state funding only, not the total amount per student. It was roughly $3,900 per student. We are now at almost $5,200 per student. That's a $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 investment in about 4.5 years. So this idea that there are outstanding cuts is wrong. This idea that this will have a substantial impact on teacher pay is wrong. The idea that it's enough money to just start hiring teachers in every school across the state is not accurate. It's just wrong. And the idea that career and technical education will be expanded and supported with these dollars is also not guaranteed or even allowed under the language of Prop 208. So it's just unfortunately and heartbreakingly in some cases, a giant question mark of where will this money go and who will it actually help? And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Perfect. Let me unmute myself there. Great. Thank you guys so much. And there are a couple of questions for you guys. So if this plan does not provide stable increase in revenue, how would the chamber propose to do that? What's the chamber's proposal to increase revenue to K-12?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'll take a crack at it, and we can let Becky talk about what we have done in recent sessions when it comes to K-12. Cole, in answer to that question, we believe a healthy, thriving economy is essential to getting resources to teachers and schools. So Becky mentioned the 20 by 20 program. That was a 3-year phase-in of an average statewide teacher pay increase of 20%. In fact, this school year, the start of this school year, marked year 3 of that 3-year phase-in. Cole, the only way we were able to do that is because of a healthy, thriving economy. Now, what about the accelerated restoration of district and charter additional assistance? Again, we were only able to do that because the state's economy was in a situation where we could pass a budget that allowed for that accelerated restoration. And so on and so on, including things like a restoration of previously reduced career and technical education dollars. Now, one of the things that the chamber often gets accused of is being allergic to any revenue raisers or anything at the ballot box. Well, remember, we were proponents of the original Proposition 301, which was resulted in, we believe, a stable funding source and reliable funding source for schools. But we also supported the 20-year extension of Proposition 301. We also supported Proposition 123. That was a increase over 10 years of dollars coming out of the state land trust, specifically designated for schools. So we want to increase funding for schools, again, on the continuum, and we want to do it in a way that doesn't harm the Arizona economy. We're afraid that if Proposition 208 passes, we would do real harm to the Arizona economy, resulting in fewer resources for schools, not more. Now, Cole, pass it to Becky, and she can talk a little bit about what we've done recently.
Yeah, so I don't represent the chamber anymore. I think most people know for quite a few years I did their education policy work out of their foundation. And so I'm not going to speak on the chamber's behalf, but I will tell you this. I think that quite a few organizations over the last few years have tried to get in a room and figure it out as a coalition, and that has not happened. And that coalition was looking at a number of revenue sources, not just an income tax that can have an impact on the economy. I think the other thing that I would add is all of these investments that we want in education have been happening every single year without a tax increase because the economy has been so good. In prior years, we didn't have that option out of the general fund because the economy was not as strong. And so to say you have to have a tax increase to have a legitimate investment in education, I just think that's a flawed logic as a premise. I think you need to say, are we investing in education? Not only was there this 20% teacher pay increase that is in the base and inflated every single year, guaranteed, $700 million a year and growing. There was, of course, Prop 123. There have been dollars put into low-income schools that are getting outcomes for kids. That's growing every year, about $100 million. There have been dollars put into helping all kids, but with an extra bump for kids in low-income neighborhoods who are doing college acceleration work. And so there has been more than $1 billion put in education since the recession. So it's not like we're not putting money into education. We absolutely, positively are. So that's my perch. That's where I come from. That's my area of expertise. I'm not a tax person. I don't do tax policy. I pay my taxes, but that's really the extent of it. But I do know that sales tax is the least volatile of all the tax sources, and I do know that the general fund is even less volatile than that because it has what we all call WESTMARC. Everyone in WESTMARC knows this. The three-legged stool of a variety of revenue sources that make the investments that have been put in education in the last several years, again, north of $1 billion. Extremely, reliable. We're going to have these major ups and downs when we have things like, happened in 9/11, when we have the Great Recession, who knows what this pandemic is going to hold for us in the next 12 to 24 months, but having a reliable funding source is super important to making promises to education. Otherwise, we're writing checks that we just can't cash.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask one last question because we only have 5 minutes, and I want you guys to have a chance to wrap up and save your final piece. So this one is, why didn't the legislature do its job and solve the school funding problem while maintaining the flexibility that the chamber says is so important? And you're not a legislator, Garrick, and I understand you maybe can't speak for the state legislature, but what is your relationship there, and how do you work with the legislature on solving these kinds of issues?
Yeah, I want to be clear, Cole, that and I don't want to speak for Becky, but I think when we approach education policy generally and education funding policy more specifically, it's constantly a work in progress. We've never said the job is done or solved. So I believe that the 20% pay raise was significant, and that is something that we should point to as a positive. Restoring district and charter additional assistance, I believe, is a positive. Extending Proposition 301 for 20 years, I believe, is a positive. Now, remember, state legislatures and governors, they have quite a balancing act on their hands. Education is a significant portion of the state budget, but there are other core responsibilities that have to be balanced in that, including things like public safety and healthcare, and something we talked about earlier, things like higher education, our community colleges and universities. So I know perhaps Arizona voters are getting tired of hearing that line from Doug Ducey, but I will use it here, which is no one has ever said we have checked the box on education. The question is, what is the wise way to approach education funding? We believe that passing Proposition 208 would be unwise for all the reasons we've discussed today, and that what we should do is ensure a healthy, thriving economy so we have some more options on the table to fund education in a healthier way. So, Cole, I'll pass it to Becky if she has any thoughts on that.
Great.
Well, I know we're at two quick bullet point answers. I think solving the education funding problem isn't just an amount problem, it's a how problem. And the current structure is a mess. It's built around redlining and district boundaries, built during a time of housing and job segregation. Some districts have access to local revenues that many, many other districts do not. And so how we fund education and making sure it actually gets to the school and to the teachers, which is a major problem with Prop 208 compared to 301, we really, really need to talk about that. And we also need to acknowledge when we look at the structure of funding that more than 40% of kids do not go to the neighborhood school across the street, and we are not distributing local funds accordingly. So, how we fund, where the money goes, does it make it to the school and to the teacher? These are the kinds of things that we all see as part of a grand bargain for continuing the large investments that have been going on the last 4 years. And some people don't want to have that conversation, so it's very frustrating.
Great. Well, Garrick and Becky, thank you guys so much for your time. And before you go, I want to each let you say one final piece to get your point across. And with that, Garrick, I'll let you start.
Well, thanks, Cole, and thanks to WESTMARC for the invitation. We know WESTMARC is an organization that cares deeply about Arizona's economic development prospects, and that includes education, the way education figures into our economic development strategy. We're afraid the passage of Proposition 208 would severely undermine Arizona's competitive standing. And you heard Becky make a point that I just want to go over one more time, which I think is important. If you are a school reformer and you are concerned about outcomes and achievement, you're not going to find that in Proposition 208. And if you believe that our school funding structure is outdated and outmoded and not meant for the times, you're not going to fix that under Proposition 208 either. Arizona can do much better than the proposal on the table with Proposition 208, and we would urge everyone to please vote no. You can go to our website at noprop208az.com. Thank you, Cole.
Thanks, Garrick. Becky?
I'll just quickly say I didn't prepare a closing statement or anything. I just think this is a wasted opportunity. it's really sad to see that we're going to go to the ballot, that millions of dollars are going to be spent on campaigns, including mostly out of state on the yes side, to pass something that's not going to have an impact. It's again, a wasted opportunity. And I hope that we can all get together here soon and talk about a real proposal that actually goes to teachers and kids. And that'll be a good day.
Becky, Garrick, thank you guys so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I know all of our 30+ attendees appreciated hearing both sides as well. So once again, thank you and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. And that will conclude our portion today, everyone. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you again soon.